Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
The iron cage had been sitting in the sand for 3 days now, half buried where the dunes shifted and reformed, like the breathing of something vast and indifferent. Inside it, a man knelt with his wrists bound behind him, his skin blistered from the white sun that hammered down on Tavra 9 without mercy or variation. The metal bars burned to the touch during the day and froze at night, a cycle of torment designed not just to punish, but to break. Chief Vorik stood before the cage now, his shadow mercifully blocking the sun for a moment. He was a mountain of a man, his blue-gray skin marked with ritual scars that traced his lineage back 7 generations of Kharan warriors. In his massive hand, he held a clay cup filled with brackish water, the kind that came from the dying wells near the Ash Plateau. More salt than liquid, more cruelty than kindness. Suriath, 3 days, Vorik said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd of warriors and clan members who had assembled to witness what happened to those who crossed into Kharan territory uninvited. 3 days you've had to consider your choices, Offworlder, to think about the arrogance that brought you here, to understand that this world doesn't forgive weakness. The man in the cage didn't look up. His dark hair was matted with sweat and sand, his clothes, what remained of them, torn and stained, but his breathing was steady, controlled, not the gasping panic Vorik usually saw by the 3rd day. I'm told your ship crashed near the Iron Teeth, Vorik continued, circling the cage slowly, that you survived the impact, that you walked across 30 kilometers of desert with nothing but a broken transmitter and the kind of stupid hope only humans carry. He paused, tilting his head. Tell me, Offworlder, what were you hoping to find out here? Rescue? Mercy? The man's lips moved, cracked and bleeding. Water? A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Vorik smiled without humor and lifted the cup. Water, yes, we have that. Not much, but some. He held it just outside the bars, close enough that the prisoner could smell the mineral tang of it. You want it? No. The word was barely a whisper, but it cut through the laughter like a blade. The crowd went quiet. Vorik's smile faded. No? Not from you. The man raised his head then, and his eyes, gray as storm clouds over dead seas, locked onto Vorik's with something that wasn't defiance exactly, but wasn't surrender either. I'd rather pray the vultures get to me first. Vorik's jaw tightened. He'd seen brave men before, had tortured them, broken them, scattered their bones across the plateau as warnings, but there was something in this one's voice that felt different. Not resignation, not even courage. Something colder. He raised the cup higher. Then let me help you pray. He poured the water onto the sand beside the cage, watching it darken and vanish into the thirsty earth. The crowd murmured approval. Vorik turned to address them all, his voice rising. This is what happens to those who... I always eat first. The words came from behind him, calm and level and utterly out of place. The murmuring stopped. Vorik turned slowly, his hand already moving toward the blade at his hip. The crowd parted like water around stone. She stepped through the gap they made, her boots leaving shallow prints in the sand, her movements economical and precise. Kareth. Even those who'd never seen her knew the name. She was Kharan by blood, but not by allegiance. A huntress who moved between clans like smoke, trading kills for resources and asking no one's permission. Her skin was the color of deep ocean water under moonlight, marked with scars that told stories she never spoke aloud. Her hair was bound back in tight braids threaded with small bones. Not trophies exactly, but reminders. She wore light armor made from desert reptile hide, mottled gray and tan, and carried a rifle slung across her back that looked older than most of the warriors watching. At her hip hung a knife with a blade that had been sharpened so many times, the steel had gone thin as paper and twice as lethal. Kareth. Vorik didn't move his hand from his weapon, but he didn't draw it either. This doesn't concern you. Everything concerns me when you're wasting water. She nodded toward the dark stain in the sand. That was 3 days' worth for a scout, or 1 day's worth for a child. You just poured it out to make a point. The point needed making. To who? Him? She walked closer to the cage, her shadow falling across the bars. The prisoner watched her with those storm-gray eyes, but he didn't speak. He's already dying. Look at him. Dehydration, heat stroke, probably internal bleeding from the crash. You're just drawing it out because you're bored. Vorek's hand tightened on his blade hilt. Careful. Of what? You. Kareth smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We both know how that ends, Vorek. We both remember the last time you tried to make me careful. The scar on Vorek's left forearm, the one that ran from wrist to elbow in a jagged line, seemed to pulse in the afternoon light. The crowd shifted, uneasy. Stories about that scar circulated in whispers, and none of them ended well for anyone who pushed Kareth too far. Vorek released his blade and held up both hands in a gesture that might have been conciliatory if his eyes weren't still hard as flint. Then what do you want? Him. She pointed at the cage. I'll take him off your hands. You get to save face. I get a guide. A guide? Vorek laughed, but it sounded forced. To where? West, past the Wind Canyon. The laughter died. Several warriors took an involuntary step back. The Wind Canyon was a jagged scar in the desert, where the wind moved in ways that defied logic, where sandstorms appeared out of clear skies, and men disappeared into whirlwinds that left no bodies behind. Beyond it lay territory no clan claimed, not because they couldn't, but because no one who tried ever came back. Why would you go there? Kareth didn't answer. She just kept her eyes on Vorek, waiting. He studied her for a long moment, then turned to look at the prisoner. The man was watching them both now, his breathing still steady despite everything, his eyes moving between them like he was calculating odds no one else could see. He's worth nothing, Vorek said finally. A crash pilot with no ship, no allies, no leverage. Why risk the canyon for trash? Because trash is all I can afford. Kareth moved closer to the cage, close enough to touch the bars if she wanted to. And because he's not from here, that means he knows things we don't. Different tech, different tactics, maybe different maps of the system before everything went to shit. She glanced at the prisoner. Plus, he survived 3 days in your hospitality. That takes either luck or skill, and I'll bet on skill. Vorek's eyes narrowed. And if I say no, then I walk away and you pour out another 3 days of water, watching him die slowly. Either way, the outcome's the same. At least my way, you save resources. The chief was silent for a long time. The sun climbed higher. The crowd waited. The prisoner's breath came in shallow gasps now, his body finally beginning to fail in ways even his stubborn will couldn't overcome. Finally, Vorek nodded. Fine, take him. But when he dies in the canyon, and he will die, Kareth, I want you to remember that I offered him mercy, and you offered him false hope. See which of us sleeps better. I don't sleep, Vorek. You know that. She pulled a key from her belt, not the key to the cage, but close enough to fool anyone who wasn't looking carefully. She held it up where the prisoner could see it, then made a show of unlocking the cage door. It swung open with a rusty shriek. The prisoner didn't move. Come on, Kareth said quietly, unless you'd rather stay. He looked at her for a long moment, those gray eyes searching her face for something. Then slowly, painfully, he crawled forward. His legs wouldn't hold him when he tried to stand, and he collapsed in the sand outside the cage, gasping. Kareth didn't help him up. She just stood there watching, her expression unreadable. You brought the heat with you, off-worlder, she said finally. I can smell it on you. The man coughed, spitting blood into the sand. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. Not heat, fire. Mine's coming from the west. Kareth's eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? He raised one shaking hand and pointed toward the horizon, toward the empty expanse of desert that stretched beyond the ash plateau. Look, she turned. At first, she saw nothing, just the familiar wasteland of sand and rock and heat shimmer. Then her eyes found it, a thin column of black smoke rising in the distance, too straight to be natural, too dark to be a dust devil. What is that? Someone in the crowd asked. Before anyone could answer, the horizon flashed orange. Not lightning, not reflection, a controlled detonation, the kind that sent a shockwave rolling across the desert floor seconds before the sound caught up. The ground beneath their feet trembled. Reavers, Vorek breathed. The word sent a wave of panic through the crowd. The Dune Reavers were mercenaries, scavengers, and butchers who owed allegiance to no clan and respected no territory. They moved in fast, hit hard, and left nothing but bones and stripped settlements behind them. If they were this close, Another flash. This one closer. Close enough that Kareth could see the fireball bloom against the white sky. They found something, she said, or someone told them where to look. She turned to stare at the prisoner, who was still on his knees in the sand, still breathing hard. But his eyes were clear now, focused, watching her. You, she said softly. They're following you. He didn't deny it, just held her gaze. Vorik drew his blade. Then we kill him now before they… No! Kareth stepped between them. If we kill him, they'll burn this camp to ash looking for whatever he was carrying. If we run, they'll track us down anyway. There's only one option. What option? She grabbed the prisoner by the collar and hauled him to his feet with a strength that surprised even him. He swayed, barely conscious, but she held him upright. We give them what they want, she said, or make them think we did. Vorik's face twisted in confusion and anger. You're insane. Probably. She looked at the prisoner again. But I'm also right. You know I'm right. The prisoner nodded weakly. They'll come at night, he whispered. That's when they always come. When the shadows are longest and the fear is deepest. They use the darkness like a weapon. Another explosion, closer still. This one sent a spray of sand and debris raining down on the crowd. People scattered, running for tents and weapons and whatever cover they could find. Kareth adjusted her grip on the prisoner, slinging one of his arms over her shoulder. Vorik, I need nothing, he snarled. You take him. You take the consequences. Don't come crying to me when they gut you both in the dark. He turned and strode away, barking orders to his warriors. Within seconds, the camp was in motion. Organized chaos as fighters took positions and civilians disappeared into reinforced shelters. Kareth stood there supporting the weight of a man who could barely stand, watching the smoke columns multiply on the horizon. Can you walk? She asked. Eventually. Can you fight? Eventually. She smiled despite herself. Good, because eventually is about 5 minutes from now, and I really don't want to die alone. She started dragging him toward the edge of the camp, away from the defensive positions, toward the open desert where the smart people never went. He stumbled along beside her, his legs remembering how to move through sheer desperate will. Where are we going? He managed to ask. The canyon. Like I said. You were serious about that? I'm always serious. She adjusted her rifle strap, her eyes scanning the horizon. The smoke was everywhere now, closing in from multiple directions. The Reavers won't follow us there. They're mercenaries, not suicidal. And us? She glanced at him, and for just a moment, he saw something flicker in her expression. Not quite humor, not quite resignation, something in between. Jury's still out, she said. They reached the perimeter of the camp just as the first alarms began to sound. High-pitched wails that cut through the desert wind like knives. Kareth broke into a run, half dragging, half carrying the prisoner with her. He kept pace somehow, his body running on adrenaline and borrowed time. Behind them, the first gunshots rang out. Screams followed. Don't look back, Kareth said. I'm not. Good, because if you do, you'll see that we're already too late. They crested a dune and dropped down the other side, out of sight of the camp. Below them stretched miles of empty desert, rippling and treacherous in the fading afternoon light. In the distance, barely visible through the heat shimmer, stood the entrance to the Wind Canyon, a jagged tear in the earth that looked like the planet itself had been cut open and left to bleed. The prisoner stared at it, his face pale beneath the grime and blood. I've heard stories about that place, he said quietly. So have I. They say the wind speaks to you, shows you things that aren't real. Maybe, Kareth tightened her grip on him, or maybe it shows you things that are real, but you weren't supposed to see. Either way, it's better than what's behind us. Another explosion lit the sky, this one so close that Kareth felt the heat of it against her back. She didn't look, just started running again, pulling the prisoner with her. He kept up. His breath came in ragged gasps, his legs shaking with every step, but he kept up. Why? He asked between breaths. Why help me? Because Vorik's an idiot, she said, and because you pissed him off. That makes you interesting. That's it? She didn't answer, just ran. They covered maybe 2 kilometers before the prisoner's legs finally gave out. He collapsed in the sand, coughing blood, his body shutting down piece by piece. Kareth knelt beside him, checking his pulse. It was weak but steady, stubborn, just like the rest of him. "Stay conscious," she ordered. "We're not stopping yet." "Can't," he whispered. "Sorry." "Don't apologize. Just breathe." She pulled a canteen from her belt, her personal supply, not the communal water Vorik had wasted. She tilted it to the prisoner's lips, letting him drink in small, careful sips. He swallowed, coughed, swallowed again. His eyes fluttered open. "You said you always eat first," he murmured. "I do. But you gave me water." "Water isn't food." She capped the canteen and stood, scanning the horizon. The smoke columns were spreading, merging into a single black wall that blotted out the western sky. "Besides, you're no good to me dead. Not yet." "Comforting. I'm not here to comfort you." She reached down and hauled him to his feet again. "I'm here to survive. If you can keep up, great. If not..." She left the sentence unfinished. They started moving again, slower this time. The prisoner's weight grew heavier with each step, but Kareth didn't complain. She just adjusted her grip and kept walking. The sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of red and gold and copper, beautiful and merciless in equal measure. Kareth had lived on Tavra 9 her entire life, had seen 1,000 sunsets just like this one, but she never got used to how quickly the light died. One moment the world was burning with color, the next darkness swallowed everything. They were still a kilometer from the canyon entrance when the sounds behind them changed. No more explosions, no more alarms, just an eerie, oppressive silence that was somehow worse. Kareth stopped walking. "What is it?" the prisoner asked. "They're done." "Done?" "With the camp." She turned to look back the way they'd come. From this distance, she couldn't see details, just the faint glow of fires burning against the darkening sky. Either everyone's dead or everyone surrendered. Either way, the Reavers won. The prisoner followed her gaze. His expression was unreadable in the gathering dusk. "How long before they come after us?" "Depends on whether they know you're alive." Kareth started walking again. "If they think you died in the attack, we might have until morning. If they know we ran..." A sound cut through the darkness, faint but distinct, the whine of engines spinning up. Kareth's blood went cold. "Run," she said. "What?" "Run!" She grabbed his arm and sprinted toward the canyon, no longer caring if he kept up or not. The sound grew louder, multiple engines now, converging from different directions. Spotlights swept across the dunes behind them, turning night into artificial day. They reached the canyon entrance just as the first vehicle crested the ridge behind them. It was a sand ship, a converted cargo hauler retrofitted with armor plating and heavy weapons, its hull painted with the red and black markings of the Dune Reavers. More ships appeared on either side, flanking them, cutting off any escape routes except forward. Into the canyon. Kareth didn't hesitate. She pulled the prisoner through the narrow entrance between towering rock walls that seemed to close in overhead. The wind hit them immediately. Not a gentle breeze, but a physical force that tugged at their clothes and filled their ears with a sound like distant screaming. The spotlights followed them in, illuminating the canyon walls in harsh white light. Kareth could hear voices now, shouting in languages she didn't recognize. The Reavers were communicating, coordinating, closing the trap. She pulled the prisoner deeper into the canyon, around a sharp bend that momentarily broke line of sight with their pursuers. Her mind raced. They needed cover, needed weapons, needed a plan. What they had was rock, wind, and borrowed time. "In there," the prisoner gasped, pointing to a dark opening in the canyon wall. A cave or tunnel, barely visible in the shadows. Kareth dragged him toward it. The opening was narrow enough that they had to turn sideways to squeeze through, but once inside, it opened into a larger space. She pulled out a small chem light and cracked it, flooding the area with pale green illumination. The cave was deeper than she'd expected, extending back into the rock. Ancient markings covered the walls. Not writing exactly, but symbols that might have been warnings or prayers, or simple attempts to leave something permanent in an impermanent world. "We can't stay here," she said. "They'll search every..." The prisoner pressed a finger to her lips, silencing her. They both heard it at the same time. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving cautiously through the canyon outside. The Reavers had dismounted and were sweeping the area on foot. Kareth killed the chem light. Darkness swallowed them whole. She felt the prisoner move beside her, heard the rustle of fabric as he positioned himself against the cave wall. His breathing was still labored, but controlled. waiting. The footsteps grew closer. Voices low and professional. These weren't raiders playing at being soldiers. These were actual soldiers playing at being raiders, which was infinitely more dangerous. A spotlight beam swept past the cave entrance, paused, came back. It lingered on the opening for what felt like an eternity, then moved on. The footsteps continued past. Kareth counted at least 6 sets, probably more. They were spreading out, checking every shadow, every crack in the rock. The prisoner leaned close to her ear. His breath was hot against her skin when he whispered, "They're not leaving until they find me." "What did you do?" she breathed back. "Stole something they needed. Something worth more than this entire planet." "What?" "Proof." Before she could ask what that meant, a sound echoed through the canyon, a deep, resonant boom that made the ground beneath their feet tremble. Not an explosion this time. Something else. Something older. The wind changed direction. Kareth felt it happen, felt the air pressure shift in a way that made her ears pop and her instincts scream. The prisoner felt it too. She sensed him tense beside her. "Storm," he whispered. "No, wrong season. Wrong planet." His hand found hers in the darkness, squeezed once. But the canyon doesn't care about seasons. It makes its own weather. As if in response, the wind began to howl. Not the normal desert wind that Kareth had grown up with, but something vicious and alive. Something that clawed at the rock and shrieked through the narrow passages like it was hunting. Outside the cave, the voices changed. Confusion, then fear. "Pull back," someone shouted. "Everyone back to the ships." The footsteps turned and ran. Kareth heard engines roaring to life, heard the reavers scrambling to evacuate before the storm caught them. Too late. The wind hit like a hammer. Even from inside the cave, Kareth felt the force of it. Heard metal groaning, heard screams cut short. Something massive and heavy scraped past the entrance, and she caught a glimpse of a sand ship being dragged sideways by the wind, its engines screaming uselessly as it tumbled across the canyon floor like a child's toy. Then everything disappeared in a wall of sand and darkness and noise that felt like the world ending. Kareth pressed herself against the cave wall, pulling the prisoner with her. They huddled there in the pitch black while the storm raged outside, while the canyon howled and tore at everything in its reach. It lasted forever. It lasted maybe 10 minutes. When the wind finally died, the silence that followed was somehow louder than the storm had been. Kareth cracked another chem light. The cave looked the same. The ancient markings still watched from the walls. The prisoner still sat beside her, his face pale but his eyes alert. "You okay?" she asked. "Define okay." She almost smiled. "Can you move?" "Can I not move?" "Fair point." She helped him to his feet and they made their way back to the cave entrance. The canyon outside was transformed. Where before there had been a relatively clear path between the rock walls, now there was chaos. Sand drifts 3 meters high in some places, boulders that hadn't been there before. Debris from the reavers' vehicles scattered like shrapnel. And bodies. Not many, but enough. The storm had caught some of them out in the open, had buried them in sand or crushed them against the rocks. Kareth counted 4 before she stopped looking. "They'll send more," the prisoner said quietly. "I know. We should keep moving." "I know that too." She turned to look at him, really look at him for the first time since pulling him from the cage. He was in bad shape, dehydrated, injured, probably half delirious from pain and exhaustion. But his eyes were steady, calculating. "Who are you?" "Someone who made a mistake." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." He started walking, limping badly but moving with purpose. "If we can reach the other end of the canyon before sunrise, we might make it to the old port ruins. There's shelter there. Supplies if we're lucky." "Solace Port?" Kareth caught up to him. "That place has been dead for a decade." "Nothing's ever really dead on Tavra 9. You taught me that." "I didn't teach you anything. We just met." He looked at her then, and something in his expression made her pause. Recognition. Not of her specifically, but of something about her. Something he'd been expecting. "What?" she demanded. "Nothing. Just, you're exactly what they said you'd be." "They?" But he was already moving again, picking his way through the debris field. Kareth stood there for a moment, questions piling up in her mind like the sand drifts around them. Then she shook them off and followed. They walked in silence for a long time. The canyon seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning through the rock like the spine of some massive buried creature. The walls rose so high overhead that Kareth could only see a thin strip of stars, cold and distant, and offering no comfort whatsoever. The prisoner stumbled. Kareth caught him before he fell. "How much farther?" she asked. "Don't know. First time I've been through here." "Then how do you know about Solace Port?" "Briefings before the crash." "Briefings from who?" He didn't answer, just kept walking. Kareth's patience, already thin, began to fray. "Listen, off-worlder. I saved your life twice today. I think I deserve some actual answers about what the hell is going on. You want answers?" He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Fine. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm a courier for the Terran Deep Survey Corps. 6 weeks ago, I was hired to transport a data core from Station Helios to the Outer Rim. 3 weeks ago, my ship was attacked by the Dune Reavers. They killed my crew, shot down my ship, and I've been running ever since. The data core they want contains evidence of illegal weapons development, mass graves on colony worlds, and the names of every person in the chain of command who authorized it." He took a shaky breath. "That's what I am. That's what I did. And that's why we're both going to die in this canyon unless you stop asking questions and start trusting me." Kareth stared at him. "Weapons development? Bioweapons? Planet killers? The kind of things that make the Reavers look like children throwing rocks. And you think someone at Solace Port can help with that?" "I think someone at Solace Port might still have a working transmitter that can get a message off this rock before the Reavers find us again." He started walking. "But if you want to turn back, I understand. This isn't your fight." Kareth watched him go, watched him limp through the darkness with nothing but stubborn hope keeping him upright. She thought about Vorik, about the camp, about all the people who were probably dead now because this man had crash-landed on their world, carrying secrets too dangerous to stay hidden. She thought about the water he'd refused to beg for, the vultures he'd rather pray to than show weakness. She followed him. They walked through the night. Sometimes the canyon widened enough that they could move side by side. Sometimes it narrowed to cracks barely wide enough for a single person. Twice they had to climb over boulder fields where the walls had collapsed inward. Once they heard the distant sound of engines again, far behind them, searching, and they froze in place until the sound faded. Dawn was just beginning to paint the sky when they finally reached the far end of the canyon. Kareth stood at the exit, looking out over what lay beyond. The desert stretched away in every direction, but it was different here. Less sand, more rock. Broken terrain that looked like it had been shattered by some ancient impact and never quite healed. And there, maybe 5 kilometers distant, the ruins of Solace Port rose against the morning sky like broken teeth. It had been a major settlement once, back when Tavra 9 still had water and trade and hope. Now it was just another graveyard, picked clean by scavengers and abandoned to the wind. "There," Marcus said, pointing. "See that tower? The tall one that's still mostly standing?" Kareth saw it. A communications spire, skeletal and listing, but intact. "That's our target," he continued. "If the Reavers haven't stripped it yet, there should be equipment we can use. Maybe even power if the solar collectors still work. And if they have stripped it, then we improvise." He looked at her. "You're good at that, right?" "I'm better at killing things." "Good. We'll probably need that too." They started across the broken land. The sun climbed higher, turning the rocks into radiators and the air into something that tasted of rust and regret. Kareth kept her rifle ready, her eyes scanning for movement. This close to the ruins, anything could be waiting. Reavers, wild scavengers, automated defense systems that didn't know the war was over. They were halfway across when Marcus stopped suddenly. "What?" Kareth asked. "Smell that?" She did. Smoke. Cooking fires, people. "The ruins aren't empty," Marcus said quietly. "They're never empty." Kareth checked her rifle charge. "Question is whether they're hostile." As if in answer, a figure appeared on a ridge ahead of them. Then another. Then a dozen more. They were Ka-Ren. Kareth recognized the armor patterns, the way they moved. But these weren't Vorik's warriors. These were thinner, harder, wearing mismatched gear that spoke of desperate times and desperate measures. Survivors. From clans that had been hit by the Reavers before Vorik's, one of them stepped forward. A woman older than Kareth, with a scar across her face that had taken her left eye. "Kareth," she said. Not a greeting, just an acknowledgement. Syra, Kareth kept her rifle lowered but ready. Didn't know you were here. Where else would we be? The Reavers took everything. This is all that's left. Syra's remaining eye tracked to Marcus. Who's your friend? Nobody important. He looks important. He looks like someone people would chase across a canyon for. Kareth didn't answer. Sarah smiled, but it wasn't friendly. You know what I think? I think the Reavers hit Vorek's camp. I think they were looking for something, and I think you brought it right to our door. We're just passing through. No. Sarah raised her hand, and the survivors around her lifted their weapons in unison. You're not. Marcus stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. We don't want trouble. Neither did we, but trouble found us anyway. It always does. Sarah studied him. What are you carrying that's worth so many lives? Information. What kind? The kind that could end the Reavers. The kind that could bring help to this planet. Real help, not just empty promises. We've heard promises before, but something in Syra's expression shifted. You have proof? Marcus reached slowly into his jacket and pulled out a small metallic cylinder, no bigger than his thumb. It was scorched and dented, but intact. Data core, he said, quantum encrypted and redundantly backed up. Everything you need to know about who's funding the Reavers, where their supplies come from, and how to cut them off at the source. Sarah stared at the cylinder. If that's real, it's real, but it's useless without a transmitter strong enough to reach orbit. That's why I need that tower. The survivors whispered among themselves. Kareth could see the calculations happening behind their eyes. Hope warring with suspicion. Desperation fighting against learned caution. Finally, Sarah lowered her weapon. The tower's intact, she said. Mostly. We've been using it for lookout, but we haven't tried to power up the transmitter. Don't have the expertise. I do, Marcus said. Then come on. Syra turned and started walking toward the ruins. But if you're lying, if this is some kind of Reaver trick, I'll kill you myself and throw your body off the tower for the scavengers. Fair enough, Marcus said. They followed the survivors into Solace Port. Up close, the ruins were even more depressing than they'd appeared from a distance. Buildings collapsed into themselves, streets choked with sand and debris, walls covered in graffiti and scorch marks from 100 different conflicts. This had been a city once. Now it was a tomb that people still lived in because they had nowhere else to go. The survivors had set up camp in what used to be the main trading square. Tents made from salvaged fabric, cooking fires built in the remains of stone fountains, children playing in the shadows of buildings that could collapse at any moment. Kareth counted maybe 50 people total, a fraction of what Vorek's camp had housed. These were the ones who'd made it out when the Reavers came. The lucky ones, if you could call living like this luck. Suddenly, a sharp alarm pierced the air, high-pitched, mechanical, coming from somewhere deep in the ruins. Heads snapped up. Children stopped playing. The camp went silent except for that relentless wail. What is that? Marcus asked. Syra's face went pale. Old security system. Hasn't gone off in years. Then the sound changed. Not an alarm anymore. Something grinding. Metal against metal, followed by a dull whump that Kareth felt in her chest. A plume of black smoke rose from a collapsed building on the eastern edge of camp. Fire! Someone shouted. People scattered. Some ran toward the smoke with salvage extinguishers and buckets of precious sand. Others grabbed children and pulled them toward the shelters. The organized calm of moments before dissolved into controlled chaos. Kareth saw flames licking through broken windows, saw structural supports beginning to glow red. The building was coming down, and when it did, it would take two others with it. Move! She barked at a family frozen in panic. Now! They ran. Kareth turned to help, but Marcus grabbed her arm. The tower, he said urgently. If that fire spreads... He was right. The communications tower was only 30 meters from the burning building. If the flames reached it before the transmission was complete, everything they'd done would be for nothing. The alarm kept screaming. Syra led them through the camp to the base of the communications tower. It rose maybe 20 stories, its frame twisted but holding, solar panels still clinging to the upper levels like dying leaves. A makeshift ladder had been rigged to the lower floors using cargo netting and salvage cable. We can get you up there, Sarah said, but you'll be exposed. If the Reavers come... They're coming, Kareth interrupted. Question is when, not if. Syra nodded grimly. Then we prepare. Set up firing positions, establish fallback points, get the children into the deep shelters. She gestured to one of her people, a thin man with burns covering half his face. Oren, get him food and water. Oren approached Marcus with a canteen and a strip of dried meat, but he didn't hand them over. Just held them at arm's length, studying Marcus with eyes that held neither kindness nor cruelty. Only the cold assessment of someone deciding if another mouth was worth feeding. You're the one they're all dying for? Oren asked. Marcus nodded, too exhausted to speak. Oren looked at Syra. She gave a barely perceptible nod. Only then did Oren extend the canteen and meat. Marcus reached for them, his hands shaking, and in that moment Kareth saw something that made her stomach turn. The way Marcus had to wait for permission, the way he took the offerings like a beggar accepting scraps, the way survival had stripped away every shred of dignity until even water came as an act of mercy from strangers who might change their minds. Marcus drank, ate, didn't meet anyone's eyes. Kareth looked away, her jaw tight. How long will you need? Syra asked Marcus, her voice businesslike now that the transaction was complete. Don't know until I see what's left. Could be an hour, could be a day. We don't have a day. Then I'll work fast. Marcus moved toward the ladder, but his legs buckled. Kareth caught him before he hit the ground. You can barely stand, she said quietly. How are you going to climb? Carefully. He pulled away from her, gripping the ladder with white knuckles. I didn't survive 3 days in a cage in a canyon storm just to stop now. He started climbing, slow, painful, but methodical. Kareth watched him for a moment, then looked at Syra. Your people, she said, they're not warriors. No, they're farmers, traders, engineers, whatever they were before the Reavers, but they're still breathing. And on Tavra 9, that makes them fighters whether they want to be or not. The Reavers will cut through them in minutes. I know, Sarah's jaw tightened. But what choice do we have? Run again? There's nowhere left to run to. This is the last refuge, Kareth. If we lose here, we lose everything. Kareth looked around the camp, saw the hollow eyes, the too thin bodies, the weapons held by hands that had never wanted to hold weapons. These people were already dead. They just hadn't stopped moving yet. I can buy you time, she said. How? The canyon. The Reavers will come through the same way we did. If I go back, set charges at the narrow points, I can collapse the walls. Trap them inside or at least slow them down. Syra frowned. You'd have to go alone. We don't have anyone to spare. I work better alone anyway. And if the canyon kills you? Kareth smiled without humor. Then at least I won't have to watch what happens here. She turned to go, but Syra grabbed her arm. Wait, why? Why help us? You could just as easily take the off-worlder and whatever that data core is worth, sell it to the highest bidder, and live comfortably for years. Kareth looked at the hand on her arm, then at Syra's face. Because Vorik poured water into sand to prove a point, and because sometimes the vultures don't deserve to eat. She pulled free and started walking, passed through the camp toward the makeshift communications center, a tent with salvaged monitors stitched together from a dozen different systems. As she walked by, one of the screens flickered. Kareth stopped. The static cleared for just a second, and she saw herself. Not a reflection. The angle was wrong, the lighting different. She was older in the image, or maybe younger, her face marked with scars she didn't have yet, or had already healed from. The other Kareth was looking directly at the camera, directly at her, and her lips moved silently. Then the screen went dark. Kareth stood there, her blood running cold. You okay? Someone asked behind her. She didn't answer, just kept walking toward the canyon entrance. But now her hands were shaking in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the sick certainty that time on Tavra 9 didn't move the way it was supposed to. The walk back to the canyon felt longer than it should have. Every step took her farther from whatever safety the ruins offered, deeper into territory that had already tried to kill her once. But Kareth had survived on Tavra 9 for 30 years by being the thing that scared other scary things. The canyon had its storms and its darkness, but she had her rifle and her stubbornness, and that had always been enough. Until now, a small voice whispered in the back of her mind, but she ignored it. She was maybe halfway back when she heard the engines. Not from the canyon, from the sky. Kareth dropped into cover behind a boulder and looked up. 3 craft descending from orbit. Military dropships by the look of them, running dark but visible as they caught the morning light. They weren't Reaver vessels. These were too clean, too organized. Their approach patterns too professional. Reinforcements. But for which side? She watched them arc toward the ruins, saw them slow and circle like predators deciding where to strike. Then they banked toward the communications tower, toward Marcus, toward the survivors who had nothing left to defend themselves with. Kareth was too far away to help, too far to warn them, too far to do anything but watch. One of the dropships opened fire, not on the tower, on the ground around it, sending up sprays of sand and stone and shredded metal. Warning shots, the kind meant to terrify, not kill, not yet. Kareth turned and ran, not back toward the ruins. That was suicide, but toward a rocky outcrop she'd passed earlier, one that gave her elevation and line of sight. She reached it in minutes, her lungs burning, and threw herself down behind the stones. From here, she could see everything. The dropships had landed, forming a triangle around the tower. Soldiers were pouring out, maybe 30 in total, armed with assault weapons and wearing armor that looked like it cost more than her entire life. They weren't Reavers. These were corporate military, the kind that corporations hired when they needed plausible deniability and overwhelming force in equal measure. And they were advancing on the survivors with the kind of precision that said this wasn't their first massacre. Syra's people were trying to fight back. Kareth could see muzzle flashes from the ruins, hear the sporadic crack of rifles. But it was like throwing rocks at a sandstorm. The corporate soldiers didn't even slow down. They just kept advancing, methodically clearing each building, each tent, each desperate hiding place. Kareth raised her rifle. The range was extreme, nearly 800 meters, but she'd made harder shots. She found her breathing, let her heart rate slow, and put her sights on the officer coordinating the assault. A woman with commander's insignia and an expression that said she was just doing a job. Kareth's finger tightened on the trigger, then stopped, because high above at the top of the tower, she saw movement. Marcus, visible through the skeletal framework, working frantically on what looked like a transmitter array. His hands moved with desperate speed, connecting cables, routing power, trying to finish before the soldiers finished their bloody work below. If Kareth fired, she'd give away her position. The soldiers would spread out, start searching, and Marcus would never get the transmission off. If she didn't fire, Syra and her people would die alone while she watched from safety. The choice paralyzed her for exactly 3 seconds. Then she fired. The officer dropped. Chaos erupted. Soldiers scattered, looking for the shooter. Return fire chewed up the rocks around Kareth's position, forcing her to roll behind cover. She came up in a different spot, fired twice more, saw one soldier fall and another stumble. Now the corporate military had a problem. They couldn't ignore her, but they couldn't abandon their primary objective either. She watched them split into 2 groups, one continuing toward the tower, one moving to flank her position. Good. Let them come. Kareth retreated down the backside of the outcrop, leading the soldiers away from the ruins. She had maybe a 5-minute head start before they reached her, maybe 10 before they surrounded her completely. She used every second, moving through the broken terrain like smoke, leaving no trail, no pattern. Behind her, the battle at the ruins continued. She heard explosions now, saw smoke rising. The survivors were using everything they had, burning through ammunition and improvised weapons and sheer desperate courage. It wouldn't be enough. It was never enough, but maybe it didn't have to be. Kareth reached a narrow ravine, perfect for an ambush. She set 3 shaped charges from her dwindling supply, positioned them to bring down the walls when triggered, then climbed to a position where she could watch the approach. The soldiers came exactly as she'd predicted. Careful, professional, expecting resistance. They moved in a standard sweep pattern, covering each other's blind spots, checking every potential hiding place. Kareth waited until they were committed, until they had entered the ravine far enough that retreat would be as dangerous as advance. Then she detonated the charges. The walls came down like judgment. Rock and sand and debris crashed into the ravine, bearing everything beneath it. The sound was enormous, a roar that echoed across the desert and probably carried all the way back to the ruins. When the dust settled, the ravine was gone. Just a flat field of rubble that showed no sign anyone had ever been there at all. Kareth didn't wait to see if anyone had survived. She ran back toward the ruins, toward Marcus, toward whatever was happening there. She crested the last ridge just as the transmission went live. She couldn't hear it, couldn't see it, but she knew. Because suddenly every piece of military equipment around the ruins lit up at once. Warning lights, alarm systems, communication arrays, all screaming that someone was broadcasting unauthorized data on frequencies that were supposed to be secure. The soldiers stopped advancing, stopped shooting, just stood there in confusion while their command structure tried to figure out what was happening. Kareth used the moment. She dropped down from the ridge and sprinted toward the tower, firing as she ran. Not at soldiers, at equipment. She put 3 rounds through a communications relay, saw it explode in sparks, put 2 more through a targeting computer, watched it go dark. Return fire chased her. She felt something hot slice past her ribs, felt another round clip her shoulder. Pain bloomed, but she didn't stop. Just kept running, kept firing, kept buying seconds that Marcus needed to finish whatever he was doing. She reached the base of the tower and looked up. Marcus was still there, hands flying over a makeshift control panel, his lips moving in what might have been prayer or curses or both. The data transmission bar she could barely see from this distance showed 90% complete. A soldier rounded the corner, raising his weapon. Kareth shot him before he could fire, then shot the one behind him, then ran out of ammunition. She dropped the rifle and pulled her knife. The next soldier came at her with a shock baton, crackling with energy. Kareth ducked under his swing, drove her knife up under his ribs, felt it catch on armor, and then slide through. He went down gasping, another soldier. This one smarter, keeping distance, trying to get a clean shot. Kareth threw the knife. It wasn't designed for throwing, wasn't balanced right, but at this range it didn't matter. The blade caught him in the throat and he dropped. 95%. More soldiers converging on her position. Too many to fight, too many to even slow down. Kareth pressed her back against the tower base and prepared to die as expensively as possible. Then the shooting stopped. Not because the soldiers decided to show mercy, because a voice boomed across the ruins from speakers Kareth hadn't known existed, clear and amplified and impossible to ignore. Stand down. This is Commander Voss of the Terran Deep Survey Corps. Your operation has been compromised and recorded. Every action you take from this moment forward is being broadcast to 17 different oversight committees, 4 news agencies, in the Colonial Justice Department. If you fire another shot, you will be doing it on camera for the entire system to see. The soldiers froze, looked at each other, looked at their equipment, which was indeed still lit up and transmitting. One by one, they lowered their weapons. Kareth slid down the tower base, her legs finally giving out. Blood ran hot down her side where she'd been shot, but she barely felt it. Just sat there in the dust, breathing hard, watching the corporate military retreat to their dropships with the careful movements of people who knew they'd lost but couldn't quite believe it. Above her, the transmission hit 100%. Marcus's voice came through the speakers, weaker now but triumphant. Data core received and verified, Commander. Package delivered. Good work, Webb. Medical evac is inbound. Hold position. Kareth closed her eyes, heard footsteps approaching. Opened them to see Syra limping toward her, her armor scorched and her face covered in blood and dust. You did it, Syra said softly. You mad, suicidal fool. You actually did it. Not me, him. Kareth nodded toward the tower. I just kept people from stopping him. By yourself, against 30 soldiers. 27, I counted. Kareth tried to stand, failed. The survivors? Syra's expression darkened. We lost people. Too many. But not everyone. And that has to be enough. Before Kareth could respond, she heard new engines. Different this time. Rescue shuttles, medical transports, the sound of actual help arriving instead of just more violence. Marcus came down the tower slowly, almost falling twice, and collapsed in the sand next to Kareth. They sat there side by side, 2 people who'd met in a cage and somehow survived everything that came after. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me yet. You still owe me answers. What do you want to know? Everything, starting with why you knew my name before I told you. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then, because you weren't random, You were the plan. What plan? The people who hired me, they didn't just want the data delivered, they wanted it delivered in a way that couldn't be covered up or silenced. So they crashed me in Quarren territory, knowing Vorik would cage me, knowing word would spread, knowing someone like you would be curious enough to investigate. He looked at her. You were supposed to find me, supposed to help me. It was all calculated. Kareth stared at him. So I was what? A tool? Part of someone's scheme? You were the only person on this planet they thought could actually pull it off. They researched you for months. Your history, your skills, your weaknesses. They knew exactly who you were and what you do. Before Kareth could respond, one of the salvaged monitors near the tower base suddenly crackled to life. Static at first, then fragments of audio, old transmissions cycling through on automatic playback from some damaged archive. Cargo manifest confirmed. Medical supplies en route to... And in today's news, the survivor Kareth's head snapped toward the monitor, continues her work in the outer territories despite Kareth testimony regarding... The voice was clinical, professional, reading her name like it was from a report. But the timestamp in the corner of the screen showed a date 3 years before any of this had happened. Before the crash, before the cage, before she'd ever heard Marcus Webb's name. What the hell is that? She whispered. Marcus looked at the screen and his face went ashen. I don't know, that's not part of the data core. That's... The transmission cut to static again, then went dead. Kareth stood up, ignoring the pain, ignoring the blood. Then they don't know me at all. Because I didn't help you for their plan. I helped you because Vorik is a bastard and you pissed him off. That's it. Nothing noble, nothing calculated. Just spite. She walked away, leaving Marcus sitting in the sand. Sierra caught up to her at the edge of camp. Where are you going? Away. Before whoever hired him decides they need to calculate me into another plan. Kareth, they're coming for us, Syra. You know they are. The Reavers, the corporations, the people who profit from keeping Tavra 9 broken. That transmission might have bought you time, but it didn't solve anything. The Vultures are still circling. Then stay. Help us fight them. Kareth shook her head. I'm not a builder. I'm not a protector. I'm a hunter, and if I stay, I'll just bring more death to people who've seen enough. She started walking toward the horizon. Behind her, rescue shuttles were landing, medics were working, and survivors were being given food and water, and the kind of hope that came from actually being seen by a universe that usually pretended they didn't exist. But Kareth kept walking, because hope was for people who had something to lose, and she'd lost everything a long time ago. She made it maybe 2 kilometers before she heard footsteps behind her. Not running, just walking, steady and patient. She didn't turn around. Go away, Marcus. Can't. I still need a guide. To where? Your people are here. My people are in orbit. I'm still down here. And according to my calculations, the Reavers have about 6 hours before they realize what happened and come looking for revenge. He moved to walk beside her. I don't know about you, but I'd really rather not be here when that happens. So fly away. You've got shuttles now. They're not mine. They're medical evac only. And even if they were, I can't leave yet. Kareth stopped walking. Why not? Because there's something else. Something the data core proved, but didn't explain. Marcus pulled out the small cylinder again. The Reavers weren't just taking orders. They were being armed, equipped, and pointed at specific targets by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone with access to colonial surveys, settlement patterns, resource assessments. Someone inside the government. Yeah, and until we find out who, none of this is over. They'll just hire new mercenaries, arm new raiders, keep the cycle going. That's not my problem. It is if you want to live on a planet that's actually habitable. Marcus stepped in front of her, forcing her to stop. Look, I get it. You're angry that you were part of someone's plan. So am I, but we're here now, and we have a choice. We can walk away and let everything go back to how it was, or we can finish what we started. Which is what? Finding out who's really responsible, and making sure they can't do this to anyone else. Kareth looked at him for a long time, saw the exhaustion in his face, the pain he was barely holding back, the stubborn determination that had kept him alive through everything. You're going to get yourself killed, she said. Probably. But at least I'll die curious. He held out his hand. Come with me. One more mission. If we survive, I'll get you off this rock and take you anywhere you want to go. If we don't, well, at least the vultures won't get either of us. Kareth looked at his hand, at the horizon, at the path behind her that led back to the ruins, and the hope she didn't believe in. Then she gripped his hand and pulled him into motion. One mission, she said, and you're buying the drinks afterward. Deal. They walked back toward the ruins together. Two broken people in a broken world, moving toward a fight they probably couldn't win, but moving forward anyway, because that's what you did on Tower 9. You kept moving, kept fighting, kept surviving until the planet or the universe or your own bad decisions finally caught up with you. And sometimes, if you were very lucky or very stubborn, you found someone else who understood what it meant to refuse to stay down. The sun climbed toward noon. The rescue shuttles finished their work and departed. The survivors began the slow, painful process of rebuilding from ruins that were already ruins, and Kareth and Marcus planned their next move. Not because they were heroes, not because they believed in destiny or fate or any of the comfortable lies people told themselves, but because someone needed to find the truth buried under all the blood and sand, and because the vultures were still hungry. 3 days later, they stood at the edge of the Ash Plateau again, looking across the territory where everything had started. Vorek's camp was gone, burned by the Reavers, abandoned by survivors, reclaimed by the desert that eventually took everything on Tower 9. Last chance to turn back, Kareth said. Was that ever really an option? No, but I'm polite sometimes. Marcus smiled despite everything. Where do we start? The only place we can. We find Vorek. He tried to kill us both. I know, that's why he'll help. He's got as much reason to want revenge as we do. They started walking across the plateau, following tracks that were already being erased by the wind. The afternoon sun beat down with familiar cruelty. The horizon shimmered with heat and possibility and danger in equal measure. Behind them, their shadows stretched long and dark. Ahead, the desert waited with its infinite patience. And somewhere out there, beyond the rocks and sand and ruins of everything that had come before, the people responsible for all this suffering went about their business, secure in the belief that they were too powerful, too distant, too protected to ever face consequences. They were wrong, but they didn't know it yet. That was about to change. Kareth checked her rifle charge and kept walking. Marcus matched her pace, his hand resting on the data core that had already cost so many lives and would probably cost more before this was done. Question, he said. What? When you said Vorek poured water into sand to prove a point, what point was he trying to make? Kareth thought about that, about the cage, the cup, the casual cruelty that came so easily to men who'd never had to question their power. That some things aren't worth saving, she said finally. That mercy is weakness and compassion is waste. And do you believe that? She looked at him, at this man who'd survived everything Tower 9 could throw at him and still wanted to fight back, at herself, reflected in his eyes. A hunter who'd chosen to protect instead of profit, to risk instead of run. No, she said, I don't. Not anymore. Then what do you believe? Kareth turned back to the horizon, to the path ahead, to all the impossible choices and brutal truths waiting for them. I believe the vultures can starve, she said, and I believe we're going to make them. They walked on together through the wasteland, leaving nothing behind but footprints the wind would soon erase. But the things they carried, the truth, the anger, the refusal to accept that violence was inevitable and suffering was deserved, those would last much longer. Long enough to change everything, or destroy it trying. Either way, the cage in the sand would never hold anyone again. And that was worth whatever came next. The sun was setting when they finally stopped to breathe. Just for a moment. Just to let their bodies remember what it felt like to not be running. Kareth sat on a rock, her eyes on the darkening sky. Marcus stood beside her, the data core still clutched in his hand like a talisman. Their breathing synchronized. In, out, in, out. Then without warning, the air around them seemed to distort. Not visually, something else. Something that made Kareth's ears pop and her vision swim. For a fraction of a second, the desert disappeared. In its place, a room. Dark, intimate. A screen glowing with pale light. And in front of that screen, Someone watching. Not them, not the desert. Watching this moment, this exact breath, these exact words. A face Kareth had never seen but somehow recognized. Eyes meeting hers across impossible distance, across the membrane between story and witness, between world and observer. The stranger's mouth opened in surprise or recognition or horror. Then the desert crashed back. Kareth gasped, stumbling. Marcus caught her arm. "You saw it too," he said. It wasn't a question. "What was that?" "The fourth wall." Marcus was shaking. "Someone's watching us. Someone's always been watching us." "That's impossible." "So was everything else we survived today." Kareth looked at the sky, at the stars emerging in the gathering darkness, and for the first time in her life, felt the terrible weight of being seen by something she couldn't fight or flee from. "Then let them watch," she said finally, her voice steady again. "Let them see what happens when people refuse to stay in their cages." They started walking again, two figures moving through a landscape that might be real, or might be performance, or might be both at once. And somewhere beyond the edge of everything, someone watched them go, unable to help, unable to look away. The vultures circled, but there was nothing left to eat.